In our drawing room, there was never a word spoken about political matters. The only one that interested us was the signing of a peace treaty, and we were the last to be informed even about that. When the peace with Vendée was concluded, the chiefs of the insurgents who came to Malmaison received a warm welcome from the consul. He appeared to hold them in high esteem. I frequently have heard him praise them for defending their cause so perseveringly and blame the Bourbons for not having supported such a valiant resistance. Once after the empire had been proclaimed, I heard him say, "I do not know what I should have been able to do if the Bourbons had put themselves at the head of the Vendéens." The consul's aide-de-camp, Colonel Lauriston, was sent to England. He was received in triumph, and his carriage was dragged about by the crowd through the streets of London. All of France also felt enthusiastic over the reconciliation of the two great countries, which for so long had been enemies. The consul himself, who so seldom expressed his satisfaction about anything, showed his pleasure on this occasion. He hastened to announce the news to us and immediately ordered the cannon to be fired as a sign of rejoicing. It was the only time I ever knew him to inform anyone, especially any woman, regarding a political event. I do not know whether he had opened the dispatches addressed to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or if he had received the news directly, but Monsieur de Talleyrand appeared at dinner in a very bad humor, quite put out, in fact, as someone would be whose vanity had been deprived of an occasion to score a hit. As a matter of fact, it was distinctly odd for the Minister of Foreign Affairs to learn that peace had been signed by the firing of the guns at the Hôtel des Invalides. To console him for this little mishap, the consul smilingly paid him special attention. My mother's health obliged her to take the waters at Plombières. I went there with her and my cousin, who, accompanied by her husband, had returned from Dresden. During our stay, a number of receptions and balls were given for us. While at Plombières, I met several more suitors for my hand, but none was of sufficient rank to disturb my peace of mind, I being still loath to consider matrimony. As I have said, I dreamed of marrying a man who was perfect, but I had already discovered that perfection was hard to find. I left Plombières with regret, haunted by painful forebodings. It seemed to me that I was enjoying my last moments of freedom and happiness. I realized that on my return to Paris, steps would be taken to arrange a marriage for me. I was 17 years old. My mother, who at that age had already had her 2 children, felt I was too old for any further delay. We had scarcely returned home when she spoke about the matter to the consul, who agreed with her and added only one match was worth considering, namely, his brother Louis. "We may never have children," he went on. "I brought up Louis myself. I look upon him as a son. Your daughter is what you cherish most on earth. Their children shall be our children. We will adopt them, and this adoption will console us for not having any of our own. But it is necessary that our plan meet with the young people's approval." My mother was delighted with the consul's proposal. It fulfilled all her desires and charmed her the more since it seemed to mean I would remain near her. Bourrienne requested an audience with me one day and addressed me as follows. "I have been commissioned to suggest something to you which your mother and the consul would be very glad to see take place. They wish you to marry Colonel Louis Bonaparte. He is kind and affectionate. His tastes are simple. He will appreciate you to the fullest degree and is the only suitable husband for you. Look about you. Who is there you would care to marry? The time has come when you must consider the matter seriously. No one until now has appealed to you, and if your heart made a choice and did not meet with your parents' approval, would you be prepared to disobey them? You love France. Do you want to leave it? Your mother cannot bear the thought of your being the wife of some foreign prince who would separate you from her forever. You know it is her great sorrow no longer to hope to have a child. You can remedy this, and perhaps ward off still a greater misfortune. I assure you intrigues are constantly being formed to persuade the consul to obtain a divorce. Only your marriage can tighten and strengthen those bonds on which depends your mother's happiness. Will you hesitate?" I had let Bourrienne keep on talking without interrupting him. I discovered for the first time that I had in my power to contribute to my mother's peace of mind. How could I refuse? But I needed to become accustomed little by little to the idea of uniting my life with that of a man whom I did not care for especially. Such a proposal required mature consideration. I asked for 8 days and promised to give my answer at the end of that period. My brother had just gone to Lyon with his regiment. He had preceded the consul. I could not have the advantage of his advice, and moreover, I felt that it was for me to make my own decision. It was a question of sacrificing my romantic fancies to my mother's happiness. I could not hesitate between the two. In fact, this element of sacrifice had something in it which appealed to me. How sweet it is to give up a thing on behalf of another person. How much sweeter still when the other person is your mother. One thing made me pause. Is it right, I asked myself, to marry a man who does not seem to possess all those qualities which you demand? Does one's heart contain everything necessary to make him happy when love is absent from the sentiments with which he inspires in you? My reason assured me Louis Bonaparte did not displease me, that his conduct toward my cousin had been merely thoughtlessness on his part. Doubtless his kindness would make me love him in time. The ideal being I had created in my imagination did not exist. Time would have shown me my mistake. I must forget my romantic dream. Nor would my future be an unhappy one, since it was founded on the affection and esteem of a husband, on the accomplishment of my duty. I arrived at my irrevocable decision, not, however, without being occasionally haunted by visions of felicity, which, as the tears that rose to my eyes showed, were dearer to me than I was prepared to admit. The 8 days having elapsed, I gave Bourrienne my reply. But strange to say, from the day I did so, I became calm. All my inner tumult seemed to have passed from me to my mother. Too well aware of my ideas on marriage not to suspect the reasons underlying my acceptance, she wept continuously. Her glances seemed to say, "You are sacrificing yourself for me." I realized that in order to console her, I must seem satisfied. Madame Campan came to ma maison. She spoke to me about Louis Bonaparte's character. She was generally respected, and she thought he would make me happy. I was glad to have her opinion. Nevertheless, I revealed to her one of my fears. "Louis seems to me to be kind-hearted and good," I said to her, "but I do not like the disdain with which he pretends to look upon women, and which often appears in his conversation. Will this not be a source of sorrow to the woman who marries him?" "My dear angel," that was her name for me, "young men who have grown up as soldiers know few good women. It is natural, therefore, for them to have a poor opinion of our sex. But no one is better qualified than you are to make your husband change his opinion. Louis will attach all the more value to his wife's virtue because he believes that quality is such a rare one, and you will rejoice in a conversion which you yourself will have brought about." I was vain. Therefore, I accepted what Madame Campan had to say, and I no longer worried over the fault I had noticed in the man who was about to become my husband. We returned to Paris. The consul sent for his brother, who at the time was with his regiment. They were talking together in my mother's room when I happened to come in. I heard the consul pronounce the following words: "She is a sweet and virtuous girl." I withdrew at once. My heart was beating violently. I guessed the consul was speaking of my marriage, and that in connection with it he was praising me. Indeed, a few days later the matter was definitely settled and announced. The news was received with joy throughout the palace, but especially among the aides-de-camp. They congratulated themselves that I was not leaving them, that they could always consult me about what was uppermost in their hearts. They had feared I would be married off to some foreign prince. One rumor suggested I was to become the bride of the Duke of Cumberland, another named Archduke Charles. All these rumors were without foundation. In fact, there could have been no question just then of such a match. Lucien Bonaparte, who for some time had been a widower, asked for my hand. The consul had refused it angrily. Lucien was annoyed and, as I learned later, attempted to dissuade Louis from marrying me. I do not know what he said, but Louis became uneasy. He had no opportunities of speaking to me privately, as I was always surrounded by people in the drawing room, and I never received anyone in my own apartment. He wrote me a 20-page letter in which he told me, as it were, the story of his life, which for a long time had gravitated about a young woman named Sophie. He described her in detail and also her tastes and habits. With the happiness he felt when thinking of our marriage, there mingled certain fears, for he saw all the world at my feet and could not believe that a simple domestic existence would appeal to me. He begged me in return to describe my past life to him in full. It would have been difficult for me to give him any striking facts on the subject, and when I returned his letter in accordance with his request, I merely replied that for a long time my life had been known to him. As far as my tastes were concerned, I did not consider that happiness and brilliant social position went together. He answered, "If your popularity in society have not spoiled you, you must be an angel. There can be no middle ground. You must be all good or all bad." I smiled and thanked him for the compliment. I could not suppose that, admitting the existence of these two alternatives, his opinion could be otherwise unfavorable. In these confidences, Louis never mentioned his affection for my cousin. I felt rather badly about this, but concealed the fact in order not to cause him any embarrassment. I thought perhaps that it had never existed except in my cousin's imagination, that this love affair had merely been a dream. The consul had not yet said a word to me about my marriage. Finally, he spoke of it in the following terms. Well, so Louis is courting you, is he? That ought to suit you and also your mother. I give my consent to the match. My mother had not been able to fix the day of the ceremony. She burst into tears each time the subject was mentioned. The consul consoled her, made fun of her, and as he was in a hurry to leave for Lyon, where the Consulta of Milan was waiting to arrange with him the organization of the Italian Republic, he decided I was to marry 2 days later. I was not well at the time. I asked my mother to obtain a further 2 days' delay. The consul consented, although annoyed at being obliged to postpone a journey for which all the preparations had been made. Louis, who had not been told of the new arrangement, called my mother. He was much upset. He could not understand how one could change the date of such an event. In vain, he sought to discover the causes for this modification of the program. When told it had been done at my request, he said nothing further, but acted as though he sought to conceal a disagreeable impression of some kind. Mother suggested we live near her in the Tuileries. He declined, and the consul gave us the little house in the Rue de la Victoire, considering it natural enough that young married people should wish to have a house of their own and be by themselves. My mother's grief contrasted with my calmness. The more I saw her weep, the more courage I had to seem contented. I was pleased my brother was not present. From him I could not have concealed the truth. He would have guessed that my happiness was not complete. I should have felt sorry for myself when I caught his eye, and I needed all my courage to pronounce that yes, which, while it seemed to be the beginning of a calm and placid existence, marked the end of those dreams of pure yet vivid delight which I had cherished ever since I could remember. On January 3rd, 1902, my old nurse entered my room. She had heard my marriage was to take place that evening, and wishing to be the first to congratulate me, had hurried to Paris from her village. She embraced me with that peculiar tenderness that country women feel all their lives towards those whom they have nourished with their milk. I cannot tell what feelings came over me, but I burst into tears, and for a moment I was unable to hide a bitter despair, whose intensity frightened me. At the sight of this emotion, the joy of the good woman turned to anguish, but I promptly recovered and once more summoned up all my courage. The day passed drearily enough in the choosing and distributing of various pieces of jewelry to be given to the palace servants. They received them with tears in their eyes and expressed their regret that they would no longer wait on me. Such things are always touching, but my courage had returned, and I was prepared to face anything without betraying emotion. My marriage took place in strict privacy. The consuls commissaire and Lebrun, Generals Bessières and Monsieur Lavalette acted as witnesses. My mother had had a very handsome dress made for me, trimmed with flowers. The consul gave me a set of diamonds, necklace, earrings, bracelet, etc. When the time came for me to dress, it seemed silly to me to make such an effort to appear beautiful. I insisted on wearing only my pearls, a white crepe dress, and carrying a simple bouquet of orange blossoms. Would I have consented to such simplicity had I been more enthusiastic? That I cannot say. The consul called for us to take us to the apartments of state where the municipal authorities were waiting for us. We went up his private staircase with my mother. Louis attempted to follow us. The consul advised him to go up by the grand stairway. This incident seemed to annoy him. The ceremony took place. Only my mother wept. I was so afraid of saying yes in a weak, trembling voice that I pronounced it louder than perhaps I should have done. We went to the Rue de la Victoire, where the Cardinal Caperat, who had arrived in France shortly before to attend to affairs connected with the church, was waiting for us in a temporary chapel. He gave us the nuptial blessing. Murat and Caroline received it at the same time, for when they were married, the services of the Catholic faith had not yet been reestablished. This double ceremony produced a disagreeable impression on me. The other couple were so happy. They were so much in love with one another. Was it superstition or second sight? I felt as though all the happiness lay on one side, all the unhappiness on the other. I reassured myself, however. Everybody told me how kind Louis was, how happy I should be, and I wanted to persuade myself it was true. We went into a drawing room where the magnificent wedding presents were displayed. These baubles did not interest me, but my indifference appeared to vex my husband. As soon as I noticed this, I did my best to make amends. The next day we lunched at the Tuileries. The consul joked with me. My mother still wept. To change her mood, he spoke to her of his trip to Lyon and inquired what people were saying about it. It is stated, she replied, that you are going there to have yourself elected king of Italy. The consul answered laughingly. He created kings, but would not be one. In the course of the evening, my husband asked mother for a list of the names of all of our relatives. He had thought it absurd that our marriage was not announced as it is usually done, and without consulting his brother. Had announcement cards made in the name of my mother and of his own set all over Paris. The consul heard of this and flew into a rage. What are you meddling with now? He said to my husband. If I had wished to follow the accepted custom, I should have sent out these cards in my own name. Am I not taking your father's place? Isn't it my stepdaughter you married? What right have you to make use of my wife's name without my permission? You should be aware of the fact that since I hold the office of first consul, the French authorities and the foreign ambassadors ought to have been advised of and invited to this wedding, and that it only took place privately in order to avoid the trouble of an elaborate ceremony. They will not understand this oversight and will not realize that you are to blame for it. These stupid things you do, I am held responsible for. You have no business to try to be independent, and I will not allow it.